There are moments in public life when silence becomes louder than words. Not ordinary silence, the kind that drifts through empty rooms or settles over cities after midnight, but the kind of silence that feels charged, deliberate, almost frightening in its intensity. The kind that makes people stop scrolling and start asking questions. The kind that creates theories and headlines and whispered conversations between strangers who suddenly feel emotionally invested in the life of someone they have never met. For months, that silence surrounded Catherine, Princess of Wales, Kate Middleton to much of the world, and what began as curiosity slowly transformed into something far more emotional. Because beneath all the speculation and internet frenzy and endless news coverage was something simple and deeply human. A woman facing a private battle while the entire world waited outside the door. For years, Kate had represented a kind of stability that modern public life rarely produces anymore. She was calm where others were chaotic, controlled where others unraveled, predictable in a royal institution that had spent decades surviving one scandal after another. She smiled through public appearances with the practiced ease of someone who understood that being watched was not an occasional burden but the permanent condition of her life. And because she performed that role so consistently, people began to assume something dangerous, that she was somehow immune to ordinary human fragility, that she was always fine because she always looked fine. But human beings are not statues, no matter how perfectly they stand in photographs. When the palace announced in early 2024 that Kate had undergone abdominal surgery and would step away from public duties for an extended recovery, the statement was brief and unusually guarded. It said the surgery had been planned. It said she wished for her medical information to remain private. It said she hoped the public would understand her desire to maintain normality for her children. And for a moment, people did understand. There was concern, of course, but also respect. The assumption was that this would pass quietly. A recovery period, a few months away from cameras, then eventually a return to normal. But something strange happened in the vacuum that followed. The modern internet, unable to tolerate uncertainty, began trying to solve her absence like a mystery. Weeks passed without appearances. Photographs became subjects of forensic analysis. Every statement from Kensington Palace was dissected as though it contained hidden messages. Conspiracy theories spread at terrifying speed, growing more absurd and more invasive by the day. Some claimed there was a marital crisis. Others suggested cosmetic surgery gone wrong. Some theories became so detached from reality that they sounded almost surreal, but the momentum behind them kept growing because people had convinced themselves they were owed answers. And that may have been the most revealing part of the entire episode. The realization that in the age of permanent visibility, privacy itself had become suspicious. For Kate, the experience must have felt profoundly isolating. Imagine being physically unwell, trying to recover, trying to protect your children from fear and confusion, while simultaneously becoming the center of a global guessing game. Every movement analyzed, every rumor amplified, every silence interpreted as evidence of something darker. There is something deeply unsettling about the way modern culture consumes uncertainty, especially when it attaches itself to women in public life. The absence itself becomes entertainment. When she finally appeared in that video message announcing that doctors had discovered cancer following her surgery, the tone of the conversation changed instantly. Not because the internet suddenly became compassionate, though many people were genuinely horrified by how far the speculation had gone, but because reality had arrived with a force powerful enough to cut through the noise. She sat on a bench, speaking calmly and carefully, explaining that what had initially been thought non-cancerous had changed after a post-operative test. She spoke about preventative chemotherapy. She spoke about telling her children. And she spoke with the kind of controlled vulnerability that only made the moment more devastating. Because for perhaps the first time in years, the public was not looking at a princess. They were looking at a frightened human being trying to stay composed while discussing something terrifying. There was a detail in that video that stayed with many people long afterward. She described the previous months as incredibly tough. It was such a restrained phrase, almost understated to the point of heartbreak. Incredibly tough, as though there were language adequate enough for sitting across from doctors while they explain cancer to you. As though there were ordinary words for the moment, you have to decide how to tell your children something that might alter their sense of safety forever. People often forget that before she became part of the royal family, Kate Middleton lived a remarkably ordinary life by royal standards. She did not come from ancient aristocracy. She did not grow up inside palaces or under institutional conditioning. She was raised in a close family that built its own business. Friends from her earlier life consistently described her as grounded, disciplined, emotionally steady. Those qualities later became essential to surviving royal life because the institution she entered was not merely ceremonial. It was psychologically demanding in ways outsiders rarely understand. There is a reason so many people who marry into the royal family struggle. The environment itself requires a constant negotiation between the individual and the institution. Your emotions become secondary to appearances. Your instincts become filtered through protocol. Even ordinary experiences, marriage, motherhood, illness, grief, occur under a level of public scrutiny so intense that it alters the experience itself. Kate adapted better than most. In fact, she adapted so well that people sometimes underestimated what that adaptation cost her. For years, she endured relentless media intrusion. During her university relationship with Prince William, photographers waited outside her apartment, followed her through London, shouted questions at her in public spaces, documented every outfit, every expression, every interaction. There were periods when newspapers treated her less like a person and more like an ongoing national audition. Was she suitable? Was she sophisticated enough? Was she too middle class? Too quiet? Too polished? Too perfect? Even the cruel nickname Weighty Katie emerged during the long years before William proposed, reducing an entire human life to a joke about waiting for marriage. And yet she rarely retaliated publicly, rarely complained, rarely broke composure. That restraint became part of her public identity, but it also created a strange illusion around her. The idea that because she endured pressure gracefully, the pressure somehow hurt her less. The reality is probably the opposite. People who spend years maintaining composure often become experts at suffering privately. Inside the royal family, Kate gradually became one of the institution's most important figures. Not because she sought attention, but because she stabilized attention around her. She projected calm. During periods when the monarchy faced internal fractures, Prince Andrew's scandals, Harry and Meghan's departure, public debates about relevance and race and privilege, Kate represented continuity. She looked like the future monarchy wanted to imagine itself becoming. Modern but traditional, glamorous but approachable, emotionally intelligent without appearing emotionally chaotic. That role came with enormous pressure. The monarchy does not merely function as a family, it functions as a symbol. And symbols are expected to remain emotionally coherent even when the human beings inside them are struggling. When King Charles announced his own cancer diagnosis around the same period as Kate's treatment, the emotional strain inside the family must have become overwhelming. Suddenly, the institution faced simultaneous crises at the highest levels: the king undergoing treatment, the Princess of Wales undergoing chemotherapy, Prince William balancing public duties with private fear, 3 young children watching their parents navigate something frightening, while the entire world speculated outside palace walls. And through all of it, the monarchy continued performing its ancient ritual of continuity. Ceremonies continued, statements were issued, public appearances were adjusted but never entirely abandoned. The machine kept moving because institutions like the monarchy are designed to keep moving no matter what the individuals inside them are experiencing. But illness has a way of stripping away illusion. Cancer especially forces people into brutal confrontation with uncertainty. It disrupts identity. It changes how time feels. Ordinary plans suddenly acquire emotional weight. A school event matters differently. A family dinner matters differently. Even quiet mornings become charged with awareness because illness teaches people something healthy individuals often forget. that normal life is not guaranteed. There were reports during Kate's treatment period that she focused intensely on protecting her children from the psychological impact of what was happening. George, Charlotte, and Louis are growing up inside circumstances unlike almost any other children on Earth. But at the core of the situation is still something universal. Children trying to understand why their mother is sick. That reality cuts through status instantly. It does not matter how famous you are or how wealthy or protected. Fear inside a family remains fear, and perhaps that was why the public reaction shifted so dramatically after her announcement. People recognized themselves in it, not the royal titles or the palace setting, but the emotional reality underneath. Almost everyone has been touched by illness somehow. A parent, a spouse, a sibling, a friend, the uncertainty of waiting for test results, the unnatural calm of hospital corridors, the strange, surreal feeling of life continuing normally around catastrophic private news. For many people, Kate's announcement became a mirror reflecting their own experiences back at them. There was also guilt in the reaction, genuine guilt, because the speculation surrounding her absence had become so intense and in some cases so cruel that her cancer revelation forced a collective reckoning about the way public figures are consumed online. People who had treated the mystery as entertainment suddenly realized there had been a human being sitting inside that silence all along. And yet, even after the announcement, the machine of public fascination never fully stopped. Every update about her health became global news. Every appearance prompted analysis of her expression, her weight, her energy levels. When she eventually returned briefly to public events, people examined her face for signs of exhaustion or recovery, as though they were studying evidence. That is the paradox of modern fame. Vulnerability humanizes public figures, but it also deepens public obsession with them. For William, the period appeared transformative as well. Those close to the royal household described him as deeply protective during Kate's treatment. Publicly, he maintained the careful balance royal men are trained to maintain: steady, composed, reassuring. But there were moments when strain became visible. Small flashes of exhaustion, tightness in interviews, the look of someone trying to hold multiple emotional worlds together simultaneously. Their marriage itself has always fascinated the public, partly because it appears unusually grounded for royal standards. Unlike some royal relationships built around duty or arrangement or institutional compatibility, William and Kate's relationship grew gradually over years of ordinary interaction before becoming royal. They knew each other before titles dominated everything. Friends described them as genuinely close, capable of ordinary humor and disagreement and emotional reliance. That foundation likely became essential during illness. Because sickness changes relationships, it forces intimacy into sharper focus. The person beside you during fear becomes the center of your emotional world in a way difficult to describe unless you have experienced it yourself. There is a particular loneliness that illness creates even when surrounded by support. People can comfort you. Doctors can treat you. Family can love you. But ultimately, the fear exists inside your own body and mind. You carry it personally, quietly, sometimes invisibly. And for someone like Kate, whose entire adult life has involved presenting emotional steadiness publicly, allowing vulnerability to become visible must have required enormous courage. Royal culture historically has not handled emotional openness particularly well. The institution was built around restraint, composure, distance. Queen Elizabeth II embodied that philosophy almost perfectly. She rarely revealed private emotion publicly because her generation viewed emotional control as part of duty itself. But younger royals exist in a different cultural environment. Mental health discussions are more open now. Emotional transparency is more accepted. Harry spoke openly about therapy and trauma. William discussed grief and mental health advocacy. Kate herself worked extensively around early childhood emotional development. Their generation of royals began trying to modernize the emotional language of monarchy. Her illness accelerated that shift in ways nobody expected. Suddenly, one of the most recognizable women in the world was speaking openly about chemotherapy and fear and uncertainty. Not dramatically, not emotionally uncontrolled, but honestly enough to puncture the illusion of royal invulnerability. And maybe that was why the moment resonated so deeply. Because beneath all the ceremony and symbolism and media spectacle, people were reminded that these individuals are still subject to the same fragility as everyone else, the same fear, the same mortality, the same desperate hope that treatment will work and life will continue. As months passed, reports suggested Kate gradually regained strength. Public appearances remained limited, carefully managed around her recovery. But every time she appeared, there was a visible emotional response from crowds that felt different from ordinary royal enthusiasm. Less celebrity fascination, more collective relief. People wanted her to be okay, not because she was perfect, but because suffering tends to dissolve certain barriers between public figures and ordinary people. Illness creates emotional recognition. And perhaps the most shocking thing about Kate Middleton's private battle was not the illness itself, tragic as it was. It was the realization that even someone who seemed so composed, so protected, so artfully managed by one of the oldest institutions in the world, could still be vulnerable in ways completely beyond control. No palace can shield people from mortality. No title can negotiate with fear. No amount of public admiration can make chemotherapy easier or erase the emotional weight carried by a family navigating uncertainty together. There is also something quietly tragic about the timing of everything. The monarchy had spent years trying to project stability after enormous upheaval. The death of Queen Elizabeth II, Harry and Meghan's departure, ongoing public criticism, generational transition. Kate and William represented the institution's future. Youthful but experienced, familiar but modern. They were supposed to symbolize continuity moving forward. Then suddenly the future itself looked fragile. And that frightened people more than they expected. Because monarchies survive partly through emotional symbolism, they reassure nations through continuity. Familiar faces appearing on balconies, ceremonies repeating across generations. The idea that despite political chaos and social change, certain structures remain stable. Kate's illness disrupted that emotional certainty. It reminded the public that even symbols are human beings first. There were moments during the public conversation when the cruelty of modern media culture became almost impossible to ignore. People demanded proof of illness, proof of recovery, proof of authenticity. The manipulated Mother's Day photograph released by the palace created another storm entirely when agencies withdrew it over editing concerns, fueling further conspiracy theories before the cancer announcement finally arrived. Looking back now, the entire period feels like a case study in what happens when public obsession collides with institutional secrecy in the social media era. The palace's instinct was privacy and controlled information. The internet's instinct was endless speculation. Between those forces sat an actual woman dealing with cancer. That disconnect is important, because sometimes discussions about royals become so wrapped in symbolism and politics and media narratives that people forget there are individuals inside the story experiencing genuine emotional consequences. Kate never chose celebrity in the modern influencer sense. She chose a relationship that eventually placed her inside one of the most scrutinized institutions on earth. And for years she fulfilled that role with remarkable discipline. But discipline cannot prevent illness. Grace cannot prevent fear. Composure cannot prevent nights spent awake imagining worst-case scenarios while your children sleep down the hall. One of the reasons her story resonated globally is because it exposed something many people feel privately, but rarely articulate: the exhaustion of trying to appear strong while struggling internally. So many people recognize themselves in that dynamic. The parent who keeps smiling through illness for their children, the spouse who reassures everyone else while privately terrified, the professional who continues functioning while emotionally overwhelmed. Kate's public image had always been built around strength through composure. Her illness revealed the cost of maintaining that composure under extraordinary pressure. And still, through everything, she remained remarkably measured. There were no dramatic interviews attacking institutions, no emotional public breakdowns, no attempts to weaponize sympathy. Just brief updates, careful appearances, and a visible determination to protect her family's privacy as much as possible. That restraint itself became emotionally powerful, because sometimes courage looks less like dramatic speeches and more like continuing quietly through frightening circumstances, without allowing fear to consume the people around you. There is an image that stayed with many observers from one of her later public appearances after treatment updates emerged. She smiled at crowds, waved, spoke briefly with children. On the surface, it looked like countless royal appearances before it, but there was something different in the reaction to her. People no longer saw only elegance or royalty. They saw survival, and survival changes how people are perceived. Not in a glamorous way, in a human way. The woman standing there was no longer simply the polished future queen people had admired for years. She was someone who had sat in hospitals, heard terrifying medical language, worried about her children, faced uncertainty privately, and still stepped back into public life carrying all of that invisibly inside her. That knowledge altered the emotional relationship between her and the public, perhaps permanently, because once people witness vulnerability in someone they previously viewed as symbolic, the symbol becomes real in a new way. And maybe that is ultimately why Kate Middleton's private battle shocked fans so deeply. Not because illness is rare, not because cancer discriminates between ordinary people and royalty, but because her situation shattered the illusion that composure equals invulnerability. For years, she looked like someone untouched by chaos. Then suddenly the world realized she had been carrying fear and pain privately while still trying to protect everyone around her from the full weight of it. That realization forced people to confront something uncomfortable about public life itself. The fact that we often demand emotional performance from people without considering what it costs them personally. And somewhere behind palace walls, beyond headlines and speculation and public statements, there was simply a woman trying to heal while holding her family together. Everything else came second to that.